There are three actions of Jesus from the gospel reading today that I believe can comfort and guide us in these times we are living in. And they all have something in common. In the midst of urgency and need, people crowding to have Jesus heal them, his disciples hunting him down, Jesus slows everything down and shows us a way to attend to the human need for connection with God and each other. And these are the ways he does it in the gospel today. First, on the Sabbath, he goes immediately to Simon's mother-in-law, who is sick with a fever, and he takes her by the hand and lifts her up. Secondly, he goes to a deserted place while it's still dark and very early, and he prays. And finally, as he makes his way to neighboring towns, not to heal the swarms of people wanting to be healed of disease, but to proclaim the message of the good news, just as it states so clearly, this is what he came out to do. For most of us, the pandemic has slowed our lives down a bit. Many no longer have to commute to and from work. We have longer days in the same setting, our homes, and time is not marked so clearly for beginning and ending activities as it was pre-pandemic. This new reality has caused its share of anxiety and strain for sure. And with the lack of social gatherings and time with friends, we can feel depleted of the human power of connection. Against the social norms of his day, Jesus takes Simon's mother-in-law by the hand. He touches her, even though she is not a family member of his. And we are told he lifted her up. Physical touch is so necessary to our well-being. And in many of Jesus's healings, he brings touch to those in need of wholeness. We are separated from handshakes and friendly embraces today because of this pandemic. So it seems especially necessary to be mindful of how valuable a healing hug or gentle hand on the shoulder is to those with whom we live. I often ask my family members, even my teenagers, for a hug because I know how much we both need them. And for all of us in this time of isolation, regardless of our living status, what would it mean to bring our hand to our heart and offer words of comfort and assurance when we're feeling uneasy or lonely? I learned this from Tara Brach, a meditation teacher who encourages us to say phrases like, "It's okay, I'm here, I care about this suffering," to ourselves with our hand on our heart to help us cope with distressing emotions. I've had my share of distressing emotions in the last couple of years, and I can tell you, it's a powerful gesture. Perhaps this is a glimpse of what it means for us to be lifted up in a time when we can't hold hands with most people. And as many suffer from the fever of COVID-19 today, both real and figurative, and I imagine that there are many ways that we are called to be present to this time of suffering and uncertainty, with the simple prayer to be taken by the hand and lifted up. The second important action of Jesus in the gospel is he goes out to pray when it's still dark, in a type of wilderness, the gospel says a deserted place. And when he returns, he knows what he needs to do. What does our wilderness look like today? Mine, in part, is having an 88-year-old mother with COVID-19, whom I can't touch or talk to. I rely solely on the goodwill of her caregivers to be with her during this time. And in the darkness of my prayer, I have to believe that God's healing and comfort somehow reaches her and lifts her up. The wilderness, of course, is a powerful place in Scripture, a place of encounter with suffering and wandering and listening. How are we listening in this time of wilderness that the entire planet finds itself in? What do we hear? How are we being called? The spaciousness of slowing down allows us to be mindful, to notice, to be awake to the subtle feelings of grief or gladness that a moment in a day can bring. And when it's uncomfortable emotions that arise, the temptation may be to distract ourselves with something else, not unlike the disciples in the story who are busy and rushing and maybe missing the message. But maybe this abundance of alone time or home time, our current deserted place, can lead us to a new way to pay attention to these gentle nudges. And when we are mindful in prayer, we can sit in the darkness and the wilderness of our lives and trust that God is with us and reveals to us what we need and what we need to do. We need at least to heed the call to retreat early, often in the darkness, and listen for what we need to be whole, ourselves and our collective global community. I don't think it's random at all that we have Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter front and center as a place for healing and justice in this time of a global pandemic. Finally, while the scriptures tell us that the whole city was gathered around the door and so many were brought to him to be healed, Jesus ultimately says, "Let us go to the neighboring towns to proclaim the message, for this is what I came out to do." It's the message of healing, faith, God's love for all that is needed the most. Healing from sickness is always desired, but healing of our broken hearts or sense of unworthiness or racial injustice are the fruits of the message of the gospel. And we are called to spread this message of healing and hope. So as we make our way through this time in our lives, let us pay attention to our daily thoughts, struggles, and wanderings, and especially in times of prayer, to what lifts us up and what heals. Let's put our hands on our hearts and allow gentle touch and God's love to be with us in a new way. Let us carve out time to be with whatever darkness is overshadowing us and to remember that this is what Jesus did. For when the crowds were pressing in, he slowed things down and went away to pray. Despite the fevers that sometimes feel like they can overtake us, may we pause and remember the message of God's great love that connects and heals every one of us. And may we have the courage to let God take us by the hand and lift us up.